in general, each of these books is a challenge, and I don't want to sound like I'm complaining about it because I'm not. But it is a challenge as to like, okay, how do you tackle this? Because again, you have a set number of pages and a set number of words to work with, and so you have to make it work within those confines. Um, but it's always a lot of fun tackling those challenges and figuring it out. Um, with Like I said, with the Jurassic Park Little Golden Book, the main challenge was how do you turn a fairly adult movie into action movie into a book that's suitable for 2 to 5 year olds. With this one, the challenge was a little bit twofold. It was first of all, how do you structure it? Because you get a little bit more into the weeds as far as like what DNA is and how these dinosaurs are created by DNA, and so you have to explain that on a little bit more of a deeper level than you explain it in the Jurassic Park Little Golden Book. But also another challenge is I have to replicate the way Mr. DNA talks because all the narration is done in his voice. So that was a lot of fun too, and it was one of those things where I kind of look for these challenges in my career because it's like, oh, because if I do it right, I'm gonna look like a freaking genius. So I'm gonna just work as hard as I can. So a lot of it was like, so first I looked at the Mr. DNA scene from the first Jurassic Park movie, and I watched it over and over and over again, just broke down, transcribed everything he said, and then made notes on like what are the red flags, like what are the things that are going to be difficult to replicate in this book. Like for example, here's a really good one. He doesn't say dinosaur. He says dinosaurs. So dinosaur has 3 syllables, but the way he says it, it has 4 syllables. He's a dinosaurs. But you can't. There's no way to replicate that in the book unless you're going into like Mark Twain style dialect territory. Where you're like where you're having the let's see, it'll be like DINOSAWERS or something like that to really make it sound like the way he says it. But if you do that, you're confusing the little kids. Excuse me, you're confusing the little kids who are reading this book because they're going to be like, dinosaurs? Are they called dinos? Or is this how you spell dinosaurs? Or, it's just going to confuse them because they're not at that level, at that age. Like I said, they're not independent readers. They're certainly not going to read any books that have dialect in them, that have like that are written in dialect. You know what I mean? So you can't subject them to that. So I can't a lot. That's one of the most kind of southern things that Mr. DNA says, because he talks like like a cowboy in an old West movie, in an old like Western, the kind of Hollywood would put out like the 30s and 40s and 50s. And that's the whole idea, is that he's supposed to be like, one of those educational film strips that like teachers would show to kids in the 50s. He's supposed to be like a throwback, like a parody of that, right? And so I wanted to keep that quality and put as many like cowboyisms as possible in his dialogue without having to write dialect, So he could call a dinosaur like a big galoot or a cowpoke or something like that. That's something you could write in like non-dialect English that's not misspelled, so it wouldn't be an issue. You can't do the dinosaurs thing. He just has to say dinosaurs. But you can have him call a dinosaur, a specific dinosaur, like a cowpoke or a big galoot or something, or have him say like, well, golly, or something like that. Those are the kinds of words I'd make like lists of these like cowboy type words, like westernisms or cowboyisms that I could give to Mr. DNA, and like ones that I thought were taking it too far or ones that I thought were appropriate. I put in the ones that I thought were appropriate, and it was a lot of like swapping them out, like this, what would I have him say about this dinosaur? What would I have him say about the Mosasaurus? And also, you've got to constantly remind the reader that this is a tour through Jurassic World, as though and this is something that is either Dennis Shirley or Rachel Klobowski. I think it was Dennis who said this when I was working on this book. That was like, imagine that the reader is in like one of those carts, like in an amusement park ride, and they're going like the cart is going from exhibit to exhibit in Jurassic World. You know what I mean? Like keep your hands inside the cart at all times, like one of those. You know what I mean? At a theme park, and so I'd have to constantly be reminding the player. The player. I work a lot in video games. The reader. I'm talking about books now. I'm talking about that part of my career. You'd have to constantly remind the reader that they're in an amusement park ride. And so it was cool because it's in a way like writing in-world fiction, because you're very much in the world of the movies. When you're writing something like this, you're writing it from the perspective of like, if there was a ride where Mr. DNA was taking you through Jurassic World from exhibit to exhibit, from this part of the park to this part of the park, his dialogue that would probably go something like this. So I approached it as though I was writing like in-world fiction, you know, because like for most local books, they're not written like that. They're written very much. You're writing them and you're sort of removed from the world that they take place in. You're not writing them as though you're in the world. And again, that's not a bad thing. It's just the way it is. With this book, for example, you know, you're writing, the narrator is very much removed from the events going on. The narrator is not part of the events going on, you know?
Yeah.
But with this, and then the same is true of the Jurassic Park Golden book too. But with this, you're in it. You know what I mean? There's like, here, I'll show you a good example. Yeah, here you go. I got it. Lucky you, we're just in time for the Mosasaurus feeding show. Stand back unless you want to get splashed. So, like, that kind of stuff, you know, giving him lines like "lucky you" and like it contributes to like, that's one of the like the cowboyisms, the way he would talk. I almost thought about like that he kind of sounds like Jack McBrayer. He kind of sounds like Kenneth from 30 Rock, if you know that show at all.
Yeah.
So like almost imagine that I was writing for that character. Like, how would Kenneth from 30 Rock walk you through Jurassic World? But the idea of having him say like, we're just in time for the Mosasaurus feeding show, stand back unless you want to get splashed, like that very much sets up that establishes that you're in the Jurassic World. You're in the world of Jurassic World, for lack of a better way of saying it. You're like in the car, you're in one of those, I can't remember. You're in one of those gyrospheres.
Yeah.
You know, and you're just like barreling your way through the park. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Oh yeah, here we go. Like this large reptile lived in the ocean. She weighs about as much as a motorhome. See those sharp teeth? Those are what she uses to chow down on smaller sea creatures. Now, it might not sound like much, but just the fact that I put that word choice in there, chow down, is like very much like a Westernism or a cowboyism. So that was very much part of that like big list that I drew up while I was writing this of like expressions that I could use. And like some were, I thought, taking it too far, but some were just right. And that was one where I thought it was just right. You know? Like here's another, this isn't a cowboyism, but this is another thing to remind you that you're in the world of the park. This is the Triceratops. These fantastic creatures only eat plants, and they live in herds. Go ahead and wave to the baby Triceratops. So see, you're waving from the cart that you're in, or the gyrosphere, or whatever, you know, or one of those little like jeeps that they have in the first Jurassic Park movie. You know, the stuff that the tourists, the visitors use. But go ahead and wave, reminding you again that you're in the park. But also you'll notice that there's a couple of actual facts about these dinosaurs in each page or each spread. So in a way, those are real facts. Those are true. The Mosasaurus, like here, the Mosasaurus does weigh about as much as a motorhome. And those facts were a little bit of a challenge too, because you had to find facts that were very simple, and that we're sort of comparing the size and shape and weight of these dinosaurs to everyday objects, but everyday objects that a 2 to 5 year old will be familiar with. So, like a school bus or a motorhome or a football field or something like that, you know. And so those were, so I had to look up a lot of scientific, serious scientific articles about dinosaurs and their basic stats, um, and then like sort of boil it down to something that a 2 to 5 year old could handle, and that was like cloaked in like metaphors and similes, like weighs as much as a football field. This is kind of like, you know what I mean? So like that, or as big as a football field or something. Um, I don't know what a football field weighs, but it's as big as a football field, you know. So it's that kind of a thing. So that was part of it too. And then the other strand of writing, the other element of writing this book was also of the Mr. DNA's Book of Dinosaurs was also that I don't know if this was my idea or Dennis and Rachel's idea. I don't remember, but it was. I think it might have been theirs, but I don't recall. But it was writing it in order, in the order that you go through the park. So I had to study all these maps of
Yeah.
Jurassic World, specifically Jurassic World, not Jurassic Park.
Did you get to see the difference with the lagoon in the maps by any chance? Where it's like at one point it's in the middle of the island and then suddenly it's on the coast in the Fallen Kingdom map?
Oh, is that true?
Yeah.
What is the reason for that?
I think it was just an inconsistency in the film that made it through to the final cut. But in Fallen Kingdom, obviously, you've got the gates that open out into the ocean, so they needed to have it there to make that sequence happen.
Oh, okay. All right. Oh, that's funny. I didn't notice that. But I think the reason I didn't notice that was because the maps that I studied were largely from like other tie-in books, you
Yeah.
know, of like Jurassic World, and those were extraordinarily helpful because it was like, oh, here's the Gallimus Valley, and here's the aviary, and here's the, you know what I mean? Here's the raptor. Is it the raptor pen? Is that what it's called? I
Yeah.
can't remember. You know what I mean? And like here's where everything is, and here's, so we're gonna want to go in order of that. We're gonna do the Gallimus Valley here. We're gonna do this here. We're gonna do that there, and the aviary. We don't get to the aviary to relatively late in the game because that's close to the end of the tour, so to speak. You know, that's like fairly like towards the exits. You know, so we don't talk about pteranodons and that kind of stuff, and also how do we like, just how do you unpack this for kids? Like the with the Ankylosaurus, it was a bit of a challenge until I came up with this. It was like the Stegosaurus is one tough cookie. See, again, calling her a tough cookie is like sounded like a very much like a cowboyism. But if any predators threaten her, she swings her spiky tail like a sword. And like a turtle, the Ankylosaurus uses a protective shell as a shield against other dinosaurs. She's also got a heavy club tail, and she can use it to clobber hungry predators. So clobber is another cowboyism, but also this was like, I was trying to think of like, what do I say about the Stegosaurus's tail versus the Ankylosaurus's shell? Because I was like, if I'm not careful, I'm going to sound like I'm saying the same thing twice because they both have tails.
Yeah.
I'm going to say something about the Stegosaurus tail and then the Ankylosaurus tail, and they both have like things on their backs where the Stegosaurus has plates. Do I mention that? And the Ankylosaurus has spikes. And then I realized, oh, here's what it is. The metaphor is that the Stegosaurus has a sword-like tail, and the Ankylosaurus has a shield-like shell. So it's like a sword and a shield. It's like a medieval knight paradigm.
So it shows how they complement each other as well.
So exactly. And once I came up with that, I was like, it just clicked into place, and I was like, oh, that's a good metaphor. That's a good, you know, because it makes little kids think of like a knight in shining armor, like a sword and a shield, you know. So you're sort of always looking for that, like how to boil it down on like a little kid, a young reader's level, of like, but a very, very small child level, you know. You're not trying to get too into the weeds, but you're trying to actually say things that are scientifically accurate, but you're saying it in a way that they can digest it, you know. And that's also in Mr. DNA's voice. So there's a few sort of balls that you're juggling while you're writing something like this, but I think it came out really well. And again, I have to say, like Paul Davies, that's with a Z at the end, Daviz. Um, he did an incredible job in the artwork, and it even looks like that sort of like 1950s animation style that was very popular in like late 50s and early 60s on TV shows like the early Flintstones had this sort of art style, and like the like also the UPA cartoons Gerald McBoing Boing and stuff like that, and also like Rocky and Bullwinkle and those kinds of cartoons, and Sherman and Mr. Peabody that I was referencing earlier. So see, it all comes full circle. But it does have that like 50s and 60s very like that sort of design sense that was very rooted in the 50s and 60s that you saw in a lot of children's books from that era, and you certainly saw in a lot of television animation from that era and advertising art from that era. And it's very clean, um, design wise, graphically, and very bold at the same time too. Like a lot of basic, simple geometric shapes and stuff, and it just works for Mr. DNA because that's what he's a parody of. You know. Look, I take a lot of pride in writing these books. As I said earlier, I feel a very big sense of responsibility because while I'm writing these books, I'm like the temporary custodian of these characters, of these IP. And so I feel a lot of responsibility to get it right and to do a good job and do right by the licensors, by the rights holders, and also do right by the fans, obviously. And so hopefully that's what I've done. But it's also just like honestly, as an author and as a parent, I take children's literature and children's books seriously because I think that there's a great tradition of children's books in all over the world. There's if you go back, whether it's like L. Frank Baum's Oz books or um, the Peter Jam Battery's Peter Pan or Morris Sundek's books or you know what I mean? Um, any number of children's books over the Madeline L'Engle's Wrinkle in Time or anything. Um, there's such a great rich tradition of children's literature to draw from when you're writing children's books today. And when you are writing them today, you feel like you're certainly a link in that chain. You're a part of that tradition. Um, and so I guess the one thing I'd say to, first of all, to Penguin Random House and Little Golden Books and Universal, and to the fans is thank you for letting me be a part of this series and this franchise and this IP. And thank you for letting me tell stories. And hopefully I've done a good job of it because it was great fun. And I love, man, it feels so good to have the final product in your hand and be like, this is what all the hard work was leading up to. And, it's these books are very special to me. So